Welcome to the Catholic Leadership Network podcast, helping ministry leaders succeed from the beginning, with your co-hosts, Christy and Sarah Jarzembowski. You'd think this is the first time I'm using this device.
Hello, it's Friday.
It is such a Friday. Oh my goodness, it's not the Monday of Mondays. Anyway, hello everyone. Welcome to the Catholic Leadership Network podcast. We are here to support ministry leaders from the very beginning. We talk about all the things no one told you about working in the church. We hope you find a grounded place to meet colleagues and get encouragement. We are glad you're here, and we are here with Dr. Tracey Lamont, who is gosh, you have such a bio here too. You are with the University of Loyola University Institute for Ministry. Tracey has taught religion, social studies, epistemology in high school, and taught theology and religion courses at the undergraduate level. Her research examines how constructive developmental theory can help religious educators explore new ways to think about young adult moral development in a complex global society. She's a member of the Religious Education Association and has presented papers on young adult moral development and pedagogical practices in Catholic high schools. Tracey serves as a committee member for the National Dialogue on Young People, the Faith, and Vocational Discernment, and has been a member of the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops' National Young Adult Advisory Team since 2017. She also serves as a member of the board of directors for the National Institute for Ministry with Young Adults. And Tracey, you have just been promoted. What is your new title now?
I am interim director for the Loyola Institute for Ministry.
All right, congrats.
We are so glad you're here to join us. And thank you for taking the time to be with us. Yeah, so happy and proud that you are really taking the reins of the Loyola Institute for Ministry. I just, full disclosure, I'm a student with LIM. I have one more course to go. I put the graduation date on my calendar yesterday. So hopefully I passed the last course. I don't know, but the date's on my calendar. So Tracey, welcome.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. This is exciting.
So you recently did a talk for our Sunday Visitor, one of their talks. Tell us a little bit about that process and how that came to be.
Oh, that was kind of cool. So I think my hunch is I was doing, I think it was the forum, the online forum, National Forum for Young Adult Ministry that we were hosting through NetYam. And I was facilitating a group with Doug Took was on it. I think Sister Bernadette was on it. I'm trying to remember who all was on it. There's a few folks on it. And at the end of that, Doug sent me a lovely note. He's like, oh, you're really wonderful at facilitating. And then like Christmas break hit. And the first day after in January, I got an email from him that said, do you want to do this OSV talk? And I was like, oh, okay, what is this? And so he sent me links about what they were doing. It was really kind of very like COVID was still going on and whatever. But they had good procedures in place to bring people into Iowa. I think we went to, they had a filming production company there. And so, but it was a really, Doug being Doug, it was a really beautiful model of accompaniment to try and teach people how to basically do TED Talks for Catholics. So the art of like the 15, 18-minute talk, and I was like, well, that's fun. I've never done that, And so, he just sat with me and said, what are you passionate about? And I had recently written an article for religion, I think it was in Religion's journal, whatever it is, it's a open access journal. And I've just been, the language of missionary discipleship and really digging into like Pope Francis and his inspiration behind his encyclicals and all that he, does in his praxis. And just listening with folks in the Archdiocese here and students of mine across the country that are ministry leaders and just, just seeing this language of missionary discipleship being everywhere. And I'm like, seems like it's a lot more, there's a lot more behind this than what I'm seeing in like religion programs. Like I was sensing a real disconnect. So I did some research on it, and I was just loving this research on ecclesiology. And it's kind of a new field for me, because in religious ed, just to preface what I believe religious ed, what a religious educator is, because there's a lot of opinions and theories on what religious ed versus catechesis, faith formation, and things like that. But I firmly believe a religious educator takes that, like religious being that which is most meaningful, like Alfred North Whitehead's definition of that. And so the person that's a religious educator stands in the intersection between that which is most meaningful and that which is educative. And so we are not, like many of us in the field, are not necessarily like scholars in a particular discipline. We take all disciplines and find out what's educative of it. You know, like when COVID hits, like what are our, history of like grief and lament in the church, and how can we learn from that? You know, so like always just constantly asking like practical theological questions of what is this teaching us to learn from? So that was my question, was what we need to learn about this conversation about, missionary discipleship. And so I really delved into ecclesiology and found it was just so life-giving to read the way that Evangelii Gaudium came about, the process between like two popes in the middle of a synod on the new evangelization. Benedict called it, and then stepped down, and Pope Francis wrote the encyclical afterwards. So that was really like fascinating to dig into that. And so in reading, probably belaboring the point here, it was a quick question, but I'm probably overthinking it now. But I think it's very important to raise up the inspiration behind missionary discipleship. And that was what drove my scholarship and my talk, was I was deeply inspired by the process that went about. And so, Pope Benedict at the time, he was saying the new evangelization, he was using language like, boldness and ardor. We have to proclaim the gospel with this boldness and ardor. Those are like his big words that he would use often in his preliminary, work leading up to the synod. And then when the synod was unfolding in Rome, there were bishops from like Southeast Asia, bishops from, different parts of the world that said, that doesn't work for us. People are skeptical of Catholics. You have to start listening deeply and know the culture if you're ever going to proclaim Jesus, And so you saw this shift in the language from boldness and ardor to deep listening and accompaniment. And I thought that was really powerful to the synodal process that we've been doing so much of in the church these days, but that it's not new. And that's why we have these synods, is to raise up the voices of people around the world, to the one universal church. And so Pope Francis listened very deeply to that and shifted his language from the boldness and ardor to this sense of deep listening. And that's where missionary discipleship came out of that. And I don't know, learning that was really powerful for me. I was like, this is why I love the church. For me, that was just really beautiful. And the more I find out things like that about our beloved church, the more I'm inspired to proclaim, So I'll leave it at that. I could go on about more, but that's kind of how it came about. And so that was, that's my dog.
That's okay.
Throwing herself at the door to come back in. I'm going to pause this for a second. Hold on.
That's okay.
That's a really exciting, I think, viewpoint to, think about what the history of the church is and what all goes into when one of the popes are going to come in and write an encyclical the way that Pope Francis did with Evangelii Gaudium. And Tracey, then can you say more? I mean, I think we were headed in that direction. So I feel like I'm almost like interrupting right now to just say, like, can you speak more then to what do we mean by missionary discipleship? Because I think that a lot of times what I see anyway is people they get obsessed with the word missionary, and they're thinking of like, I've got to get on a boat and travel far away and go, instruct the natives there who are having some kind of pagan religion. And I got to straighten everybody out and get them to know Jesus that way. Like that's missionary. And so then the discipleship thing, we don't really know what that means, but okay. So can you just give us some of that flesh on the bones?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that missionary has grown in people's minds to mean like colonialism. And and so I think And that could be, this is an assumption, but that could be part and parcel to why it's missionary discipleship. It's not taking root in our churches, in many of them. Some it might be, but in a lot of them, it's really just kind of a buzzword now, and that could be why, because the misunderstanding about the language, even in my class, I'm teaching foundations of religious ed right now. And, one of my students posted something about discipleship, and I was like, well, slow down. What does that mean?
Yeah.
What does it mean to be a disciple? Like, you have to, like, we use these words every day as if they're just everyone's on the same page about it. Some people think discipleship is going door to door and proselytizing. Some people think discipleship is, making sure that you're praying every night. Some people think discipleship is carrying out the the great charisms of God, of, like mercy, love, and justice. So like, it's not that easy. People think like, oh, being a follower of Christ, that looks very different for every person. Like, people really like to just say that that's just like some lingo that we have, like, oh, a follower of Christ. Well, what did Christ do? And some people think Christ was just really into preaching. Some people think Christ was into teaching. Do we know how much Christ was doing healing? Like, like, are we doing all three of these things when we say discipleship? I don't know, and so I think I'm just focused very intently on language, because I'm just not a fan of inflated rhetoric, and we do that a lot. And I think we're doing it with missionary discipleship. We're using it as a language for religious ed or catechesis these days. I don't think it should be. I think it's much deeper than that. And so back to the missionary side of it, it's what and I'll read, Evangelii Gaudium is just very, very clear in section 24. He said the church that goes forth is a community of missionary disciples who take the first step, who are involved and supportive. And it's so this whole concept of going forth, and that in knowing God's love for us, we're moved forward to take the initiative, to go out to others, to seek those who have fallen away, to stand in the crossroads and welcome the outcast. And then he goes on to say that Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. And so it's very service and justice oriented. It's very going out to people who you don't see and you don't know. And that's not what a religious ed program in a parish does, in my experience, And so I was just seeing like all the conferences at the time, it was a couple years ago. All the conferences were like missionary discipleship. And I was like, okay, like everything had this language of it. And I was like, but it's really clear what it's supposed to be. And I don't see any changes in our churches as a result of that. And so, and again, I'm painting broad strokes. I know that some people have really done wonderful work around this, but I know by and large, a lot of parishes were just like, oh, okay, we'll just rename our program then, and didn't do a lot that was different, or maybe focused more on the discipleship part of like modeling Jesus. That's great. But those people were already coming to your church. And that's not what the missionary part was, and so it's not going to some foreign island and proclaiming God. And you can, sure, great. I hope you listen first, but in that proclamation, hearing where God is already active in the lives of people, which is also in the directory for catechesis. But it's about actually going out and saying, like, are you baptized? Are you not? Have you left the church? What can the church do to help this healing? Like going and finding the people that left is maybe one of the first steps, and then going and finding the people that never came. I don't know, and that's not easy, because it takes a lot. And I understand that, like, the reality of parish life is you probably have a pastor or somebody signing your paycheck, and you have to produce numbers, and those numbers are coming from an existing program. And to do anything different than that is going to take a lot more time and effort to think about, and you're going to feel like you're doing it alone, because we silo ourselves in ministry a lot. And so to think about doing what Pope Francis is asking of us from the Synod on the new evangelization is very challenging. It's not what we're used to. And so I think it became very easy to just rename our programs Missionary Discipleship and not really think into what it means, and so some people did, wonderful work in trying to engage families. COVID has changed that a lot too, and that's wonderful. You can definitely look at, family catechesis as a way of, instead of just having the kids come to religious ed classes, evangelizing through the family, and that's wonderful. Those have been some really beautiful ways people have tried to adapt. I think COVID forced them to adapt. I don't think missionary discipleship forced them to adapt, But I think people really saw that there was a lot of good church going on in people's homes during COVID. And yeah, so in any case, my dog won't stop barking outside and my window's open. So I'm very sorry if that's noisy for the podcast.
That's all right. Occasionally we'll see Charlie and Christy's a screen there, just a little tail kind of popping past.
Yeah.
That he's locked out today.
Oh, poor Charlie.
Already, like when I first came down here, he was like, no, that was too much. But yeah, so I totally agree with you, Tracey. And I do see that happen so much of the time where folks just like slap a name on, right? Sarah, do you think like they just go, I don't really know what that is, so I'm just going to go ahead and put the trendy language down and call that a thing? So I'm torn right now because I want to ask you two questions at the same time, basically. One is like, how could we shift gears so that we could make what we're doing more on the missionary discipleship front, but also how do we avoid the pitfalls of, I mean, okay, so I'll clarify for our listener. I just want to say, I don't think that missionary discipleship falls in the category of trendy language, but when we just slap it on the front of things, it does make it that way. So it is something we want to engage in. How do we not just be trendy? I guess that's the question.
Right. I think it's kind of, there's like twofold thinking to that. I've, in talking to a lot of ministry leaders in parishes and religious educators, they're the ones I speak to are seldom listened to by their diocese. And so a lot of things come from the top down, like, oh, here's some new programming material that says missionary discipleship, do this. So I don't know that there's, and then there's efforts to teach them about it and things like that. And maybe they're good, maybe they don't go well, maybe people can't attend or whatever. So there's all these dynamics involved, and people in, diocesan positions do try. I mean, I'm not saying that they don't. They definitely try to make sure that information is disseminated, but there's a disconnect I've sensed between people in parishes and then some diocesan offices where they just don't feel there's a lot of dialogue. Like, why did we change these textbooks? Why are we, and some textbooks are not very inclusive to diversity either. And I'm learning that a lot in my local area. And so there's no real like effort to engage that robustly. And so sometimes maybe there is, again, so I think there's a challenge. I just sense that there's some kind of disconnect between some dioceses and parishes, kind of like just here's the next thing the diocese wants us to do, and they just do it however they're told to do it. And that's what people have shared with me. And so I think that that's problematic in some ways. And so if that can be challenging. So you don't really know what missionary discipleship is because you were just kind of told to use these new resources by someone who's not in your parish every day, and so that's, and again, painting broad strokes, and I don't want to disparage anybody in that because everybody's doing such hard work for the church. But I think also it's, again, listening. And I think that takes so much time to carve out from our regularly scheduled programming that we fail to do it sometimes. We fail to do it with each other. And that's why I'm hoping this current synod really tried to model a new way of being church. And so we're ripe for change right now. We're coming off of COVID, rethinking our practices, trying new things. Some people wanted to just go back to normal. And I was like, what was normal? And was it working? I just did a talk with directors of religious education for the Army and then the Air Force in San Antonio. And it's the same challenges. They're like, young people on the base that have like this particular amount of time where they can go for, two different options, religious education or something else. And I'm forgetting what it is. And so for the first 2 years, they naturally come into their religious ed programs. And then after those 2 years, they don't come back. And now after COVID, there's less and less coming in the first 2 years. And I was like, but they weren't coming back.
Yeah,
anyhow.
exactly.
Yeah.
Optional, I was like, so was that work? And they all realized it wasn't working to begin with, and so now, and again, so I just raised that up because I know people are thinking very intentionally right now about what to do to change and how to be responsive. And it takes very strong, well-educated leadership, somebody who has a vision and supports change. And sometimes we have our religious educators in parishes or, directors, parish catechetical leaders, faith formation, they're kind of named differently wherever you are. And, they want to change it, but then they don't have the support from their pastor, or they don't have the vision or the training to think into these new imaginative ways, because they've been doing it for so long, and they just need to keep the roof over, the lights on and the doors open, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so there's, I think the space to sit and imagine new processes in new ways that are responsive to what the needs of the church are, and the needs of the church are to be missionary disciples, and I don't are we giving our ministry leaders the space and creativity to foster those new ideas and the support to run with it? And that's where I really challenge people in leadership to say, are you just shutting off Zoom and going back to normal, or are you actually thinking, where was God present in all of COVID? Where has God been active in, the fight against racial injustice, and how is that affecting my communities? And so who's sitting and doing, some people are, but I think everyone needs to be sitting and saying very creatively, what did we learn from our people in our communities through this synod process most recently, and how are we responding? I think this is a huge moment in the church. The synod report was just released for the United States a couple weeks ago, and it's, people that I shared it with, they're like, oh God, I didn't want to read it, but then I read it and it was like hopeful, and I was like, right? It was be hopeful, very sad, but beautifully hopeful, and I just saw glimmers of hope in it, and I just thought, who's going to take this and run with it and say, look at what's happening? I had frustrations during the synod process because, I just kept hearing people saying like, oh, we did a synod a couple years ago, and so we're ahead of the game. And I was like, well, I didn't live here when we did that, so no one heard my voice back then, so nobody wants to hear my voice now, is what I'm hearing, so my experience of church might have changed in the last 6 years, and that's not important to hear again. And so I really want to push that the synodal process is a way of being church. It's not just the Pope had us do a synod, and that was language, and it was like, oh, now we have all this data, great, to send to Rome. And I was like, no, it's for you. It's for you. You heard people, and now you can respond to your people, And so I felt in some places, some dioceses, that I heard from my students as well, that it was really wonderful, and the bishop was really behind the synodal process. And I heard in other places that they didn't even know about it, and so those that have been jazzed up about the synod, I want to watch what they do. I want to see how they grow into church and how they embrace missionary discipleship, because, it's in the national dialogue process that we did. People always kind of say like, oh, you have to go out, the missionary part, go out to people that have fallen away. We don't know where they are. And I was like, someone does. So start talking to people, someone does. This is worth it. And so we enacted the national dialogue, which was a synodal listening process that was helping us prepare for Christus Vivat, the Synod on Young People, and the papal exhortation that came after that. And so I worked on that here with a group of folks in the Archdiocese here in New Orleans. And, and again, and it was very much the same process we just went through, and listening, because I was working with a Catholic school that wanted to engage the young adult alumni more fully in that community, because they were the only school. There's a lot of Catholic schools in New Orleans. This is the only school in that particular area, and it's pretty removed from New Orleans, but still in the Archdiocese. And so it was, and there's a lot of churches, but they were the only school. So they really had a capacity to foster community between the churches and the alumni and things like that. So I thought, let's try the national dialogue, let's try this synodal listening process, and started it first with, ministry leaders and stakeholders. There was too many of us. Don't ever do this over like 5 or 6 people. There was like 8 of us, and we were there for 3 hours. I don't recommend that, but it was still a beautiful process. But don't do it with more than 5 or 6 people. And so I just, put them through. That was like, it's kind of like train the trainer. How do you facilitate a dialogue? Well, you get facilitated through it first, and you watch and experience what it's like. And it was such a powerful evening. Everybody came in. I tell this story a lot because it impacted me so much. Everybody came in to that evening of like, oh, I do this in confirmation. I do this with young people. My way is so great. I form disciples. and I was like, oh, that's wonderful. Why am I here then? If it's working so well, why am I here? I didn't say that. That was snarky. I didn't say that. It just leaned into that space and listened and asked several questions about their thoughts on church, how their young people have experienced it. And that was just powerful. And it was a very It was a wonderful session. There were some challenges. I could share that if anybody ever wants to know how to host listening sessions. I can share my challenges at a later day, but I'll just say the beautiful parts. And so we came back and I processed everything. I wrote down everything they said and I typed it up and I came back to them about a month later and I said, this is what I heard. And these were the 4 strong themes that I heard from you all that said, this is what we believe young people need today, that they have experienced, that we have experienced. And I said, do you agree with this? And they said, oh, yeah, yes, we do. And I said, well, this is now our shared mission. This is what we move forward from, not the talking across, whatever. And one of the gentlemen stopped and he said, I just want to remind, and I didn't have to say this. It was this is one of these God moments where I felt it and was like, do you name it or do you wait for somebody else to name it? And he said, I just want to stop and remind you all that, how powerful it was to listen to you and that we are now, our stories are on one another's hearts and we pray for each other now. So when he said that, and I just thought to myself, we just formed a small Christian community through listening and our passion for young people, and so it was just, if that's not the Holy Spirit, I don't know. And so I said, what do we do next? Because there's no plan. That's the thing. Like the J temperament, my Myers-Briggs J is like, when is this meeting ending? And what do we have an agenda when we leave? What are our to-do tasks? And the P's are like, let's throw spaghetti at a wall. And so the synodal process is really great for P's, because you don't know what you're going to do next, because you can only know once you've been listening, then you can start discerning after that. And so that's why I think this is challenging for people, because there's no roadmap. There's no road, there's a road to Emmaus, but they turned back, there's no destination.
Right.
You have to figure it out through your discernment from what you've heard. And that takes great effort to commit people to keep going back to what they heard, not what they thought before, and so those are challenges I faced as well. And so my point was, how do you find people? And so I said to them, what do you want to do next? They said, well, with everything we named that's so challenging that young people have left the church for, we have so much work to do. We can't go out to the disaffiliated. Let's go to the affiliated first. And so they did. That went beautifully. They basically formed small Christian communities with those that they knew were still active in the church. And then they said, the next step, this was all before COVID, the next step was all of those young adults were like, can we do this more? We didn't think anybody cared what we had to say. Can we come back and do this again? And they were hosting them in their homes. And it was just this beautiful, again, small Christian communities were being formed and a mentoring process was being formed. And then they said, I think my friend who's left would really enjoy this. I think my other friend who hates the church now would really enjoy this. And so naturally, the disaffiliated were going to start being invited. Then COVID hit. So it was one of those unfinished projects, but the fruits of it were still so brilliant, and so that's, so people are like, how do I go out as a missionary and find these people? You start listening to people, because we all know people that left the church. Yeah. I can guarantee we do, but they won't come back unless they feel safe. And so how do we create these spaces where people feel safe to be seen and known and heard without judgment, So
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the important points that you've mentioned in all of this, and in your OSV talk, is that willingness to be transformed. Like the art of listening, and the art of listening is not just about hearing the words, but it's about being okay with coming out of this with a different frame of mind, with a different, deciding something different than you thought going into it, right? Your initial thought on the subject may be wrong, or it may be different, or it may be just a slightly different color or something, but I think that we as human beings get really tight and tense because we don't want to be wrong. We don't want to have our minds changed. We come into things so firm in who we are. Yet when we talk about church and we talk about dialogue and we talk about discipleship, we have to come into those spaces with a willingness to be transformed, a willingness to be open to a new way of thinking, a new way of acting, a new way of being. That is the transformation of the Holy Spirit. If we are not transformed by some of these conversations, if we are not moved in some way, are we really open? And maybe we are, but are we?
Isn't that discipleship though? Because to me, the word that I'm hearing that's eking out through all of the things that you're saying, Sarah, is metanoia. And that is like, we are all called to conversion at all times, in all places, in all ways. Like it doesn't ever stop. Where do we lose focus of that? Like, oh, I get into this role and I have my cute little programs and I have everything all lined up and it's all perfect and organized and I don't have to do anything or change in any kind of way. I mean, I'm like that about my furniture, but not about my spiritual life. You know what I mean?
Well, here's the thing that I'm noticing. So this is the first time I've been back in parish for almost 10 years. So, right, I'm at my 9-month mark at a parish. Like, parish life is fast.
Oh, yeah.
It is faster than I remember. Like, all of a sudden, are you kidding me? We're in October. I'm putting up my Halloween decorations. Like, Christmas is going to be here before I know it. And then it's the new year. And then we have Easter. My year is over. Like, that's the way I am feeling in this parish life, because it's like this freight train that's just like going and going. And there's, in some ways, there's no stopping it. You know, it's just continuing to move on. And so it's difficult in the way I'm seeing this, the parish that I'm with in this freight train it's difficult to pull out the owner's manual while it's already running, right?
Oh, sure,
Evangelii Gaudium, Christus Vivit, the RCIA documentation, all of these things, living as missionary discipleships, these are all of our instruction manuals, right? And we don't have time to read them because the freight train is hauling. It is just hauling. So like, that's where I'm struggling is, you know, I would love to be able to form our leaders with Evangelii Gaudium, with living as missionary disciples, but they're so programmatic. Like, these are the programs we have done for the last 20 years. Yes, you have done them for the last 20 years. They work for your generation. Where's the next generation? They're not here. Why are they not here? Because we're only doing the things that your generation wants to do, right? Like, so it's like, but here's this freight train and it's still going and it's going and it's going. And we just got to keep going with those things, because it's just the train's out of the station. Like, this is the frustration that I feel right now.
I think that these are, you know, taking like the birds, you know, the big picture view of that, which is maybe helpful or not, but this is the challenges in like modern living today, is that everything is so fast. We do not take time for pause. We don't do retreat. You know, all the things that make us healthier and more imaginative, we avoid and we don't do. And we don't build them into our structures either. You know, the whole, you know, you're saying like the conversation about like being firm in who you are, and, you know, and like coming out there and saying like, I have this to teach or whatever, you know, that comes from a very diminished model of education that we're just putting out everywhere. That whole sage on a stage thing, like, is ingrained itself into our ministry practices, where we think we're bringing God to people. Like, we think we're the stopgap and we're going to be the ones. And it's like, whoa, practice a little humility here. You know, like, you ain't bringing God to nobody. God's already there.
Bam.
Maybe
find him. Can you find him, sage on the stage?
Maybe you can find where God's active in people's lives. How about that instead?
Christy, you said that in one of the classes, probably my first class at Loyola Institute for Ministry, and you blew my flipping mind with that. Yes, I understand. God is everywhere. God is in all things. I understand that. But you said there is not one single person on this earth that God is not present. And it is us as missionary disciples to be the mirror of that light of God in their lives.
Right.
Like, that has transformed the way I see everybody in my ministry and everybody that I come in contact with. God is already there, you know, and I had said that before. I kind of thought that, but it's just,
you got to feel
God
it
is working in everyone. Right. We're not the colonizers to bring God to people. God is already there. And I just thank you for bringing that up and bringing that up in our conversation today, because that is huge. Yeah. We are not the saviors bringing God there.
Right. If that's it's like the Greg Boyle stuff. Like, that man sings my spirituality, you know. Just, I can read tattoos on the heart all day and every day, you know, just because he's naming all of these like casual, mundane, scary, beautiful stories with the people he encounters, and finding God's presence there in all, like in J.C. Penney's with one of his former gang members, you know, like J.C. Penney's, you know, and like finds this profound God moment in like the most. And then also, like, is deeply vulnerable as well. You know, like I read this story from him all the time when I do some of my talks, because it just strikes me so much how busy he is, how busy he's like, I got to get to this baptism and I've got to, you know, do this thing. And then all of a sudden Carmen comes in my office and I have 3 minutes now until the baptism starts, you know, and just thought I would check the mail and do whatever. And she's going on. And she, you know, has been very famously, selling herself and has done a lot of crack and this, that, and the other. And she's going on the stream of consciousness, and he's like, 1 minute, I got 1 minute to the baptism. And that's all he's thinking of. And he's trying to listen to her, but his mind is going in 100 different places for all that he has to do on a Sunday. And she stops and she says, and she's going on, she's like, I went to Catholic school. And then, you know, the first time I ever tried, you know, I don't know if it was heroin or cocaine, whatever she said. And she stops and she looks at him and she said, and every single day then I've been trying to stop. And he says, and that's when her shame met my shame. And he was so ashamed for having no time for her, you know? And so he's so radically vulnerable in his writing, and that's where I see the challenge with all of this is like, we want to have it all together. We're getting paid, or hopefully getting paid, to do this job, you know, and to be these ministers, to be these religious educators. We're supposed to know it all, and we kind of indoctrinate that in our education programs, and I'm not a fan of that. Take my religious ed courses and you're going to be thinking you're singing Kumbaya some days, and I don't really care because I'm trying to teach my students to be vulnerable with one another so that you can share your story, so that you can then the young people that we listened to, they said, you know, when we grew up in Catholic school, it was like everything was on this pedestal, like everything, you know, you were supposed to be up here in your faith. And if you weren't there, no one was going to help you get there. You know, 2-parent families that brought you to church on Sunday, you know, like this perfect life. And they're like, well, I'm never going to attain that, so I'm not even going to waste my time trying. And I thought to myself, and that's why the Pope now, you know, then put out, you know, the exhortation on the call to holiness every day, because he's like, people think holiness is just for like perfect people. That's not what holiness is. It's like these small steps every single day where you go closer, you know, do more good in the world. That's what it is, you know, and bring more of God's love into the world instead of being a barrier to that, you know. And so this pedestal idea is that, you know, we have it all together. We've got the wisdom. We're going to disseminate it. And these are broken models and that's what keeps the freight train growing, I think, you know, like it's just like, I know what I'm doing and I'm going to keep doing it. And hopefully we find some new ways to be creative, but you know, how do I put the brakes on this, because everything's going so fast, and it's just you know, so our lifestyles have been created around this busyness, and so our work ethic is as well, you know, and everything, a lot of the literature today is really especially in higher ed, pushing against, like Willie James Jennings. These are my 2 Bibles right now. It's After Whiteness, and then Another Way by Dory Baker, Stephen Lewis, and Wesley Williams. They're pushing against, it's all Parker Palmer, you know, related. I mean, I would say Jennings is, but Jennings is saying we need to create theological spaces of belonging, not just context and, you know, or content and things like that in instruction. And another way is like leading and living into change, about how you actually create spaces where people in your workplace feel they belong to this space. And that's, we don't do that very well in our churches. Everyone's just, in higher ed, we do a terrible job of it. You know, everyone's siloed. Everybody has a job they're told to go and do. And it's this mechanistic, you know, capitalism driven, you know, like exchange of information, like this is your job, this is your task, you go do that. That doesn't create belonging. That doesn't create a sense of creativity, you know, like, so it's maybe changing the way we have our staff meetings. Maybe it's changing, you know, and like small changes to say, to have those moments of silence, to pause, you know, and take those breaths. But you can't just say you're going to do it. I can't be like, oh, I'm going to slow down today. I never will. If I don't create structures with my staff, with our faculty, that we're actually doing it and holding each other accountable, you know. So we have these kind of Jesuit values now we start our staff meetings with, of like, you know, just, and I can't read them off the top of my head, but it's just taking a pause, taking everyone with the greatest good sense possible, you know, what everybody's going to say, like turning to wonder when you don't understand, and, you know, just giving people the grace to be slow to make decisions, you know. And so if I name those on our agenda, then I'm going to ask everyone on my team to hold me to that, you know. And so you know, so just I feel like if we can start building in some structures to change the way the freight train's going, it'll take time, but I think we can try, you know, and really like hold each other in beautiful space and work together. And I believe it's possible. I've always been, my story recently, now that I'm the director for this year, folks have said like, oh, we're an adjunct for you. We've been a part of your LIMX program for 20 years. It formed me and this, that, and the other. I have to retire. My vision isn't great anymore or whatever. And these people have been supporting LIM with their lives for like 40 years, some of them, and it's just that's such an impress on my heart, and I thought, I just paused. 2 people recently have gotten older and their vision has been struggling and so maybe can't teach anymore. And I thought, I am unsettled by the fact that if you can't teach for us, that you're not a part of the LIM community anymore. Like I'm not okay with this. And so I've been sitting and thinking through it, and I don't have answers for that right now. Maybe there's advisories, committees, and things like that, ways to bring people into the community virtually. These are people all over the country, but I thought, well, at least what we can do is start praying every week for everyone in our LIM community. So now we host every meeting starting with our Jesuit values, in our spirituality. And I have this little thing on the back of my notebook that my piano teacher gave me where I keep all my prayer intentions for all of our students, and so I've just been naming all of them in our meetings and saying, and then I hear more from them and I say, oh, we've been praying for you on Wednesdays, and they say, oh my gosh, well, my cancer's in remission, and it's just been building up this rapport with people that I don't have because I'm new to the position, and so it's been making me pause a lot and think about other people before we get started on our agenda items, and so I don't know, these are just small things I've been trying to do because I don't want to not practice what I'm preaching here, not a fan of that. Like, I gotta do what I'm gonna say, so I do think stopping and pausing and just building those ways into our just meetings, or the way you get into your office in the morning, and maybe other people in your office feel the same way and they would love to be like, water cooler time, can we just pause, hold each other in prayer, and just in silence, because it's in silence God speaks to us. It's in silence our creativity and our imagination can come. And extroverts like myself don't love silence, and that's part of that conversion stuff. Like, push yourself into places that you're uncomfortable in and see how it feels. See what God's going to tell you in that space, because that's kind of fun. Super scary, but kind of fun,
Yeah. Oh my goodness, Tracey, thank you so much for joining us today. We've blown past our time. I would love to invite you back because we didn't even get to half of the things that I wanted to ask you about.
So many.
I don't even think we got to like 3 questions but it's also really fascinating, and missionary discipleship, I think, is super important for us to really get to the core of it and understand the language and to process it within our own context. Thank you for bringing up Father Greg Boyle and the homeboys. I love that. I think you're right. He's really spot on with being in those moments. Thank you for all of your resources and your time. You're so generous with your time. Thank you. And so everyone, thank you for sticking it out with us a little long today. We're always a little long. I don't know why I say that every time. Guys, you just know it's going to be
40 minutes. That's it. Just stick with us for the car ride, okay?
Right. It's going to be about 45 minutes. And when it's short, you're going to be like, hey, what?
Right?
Why are we so short? Usually it's because it's only Christy on or only I'm on. So that's really the only time that we're at the 30-minute mark. But whatever, I keep talking to make it longer. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We are here to talk about all those things nobody's really talking about in Catholic ministry. We hope that this builds your leadership. We hope that you are transformed and continue to see God working in your beautiful life and ministry. Thank you, and have a great day. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.